This is All India Radio, Power of Listening. Under this series, tonight we take you on a journey to the world of yet another magnificent facet of the traditional Indian knowledge systems, ancient Indian knowledge of eclipses. In today's episode, we shall be focusing on the ancient Indian knowledge of eclipses. This program is scripted by Neha Tripathi, science communicator and writer, and the expert on the show is Dr. Mayank Vahiya, scientist, Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. Stay tuned.
Gazing up at the night sky, wondering about those twinkling bodies spread all over, has been a universal human activity from times immemorial. From poets to scientists to laypersons, outer space and her constituents is a field that generates immense interest in people in a variety of ways. And this has been happening over millennia. Unraveling the mysteries of celestial phenomena has been the endeavor of innumerable people. Understanding eclipses is no exception to that. All of us must have seen an eclipse sometime or the other. We have even studied the happening in school as well. But what we are not much aware of is that phenomena in the cosmos have many a Vedic story to tell too. To recite one such story, we have an expert with us.
Hello, I am Mayank Vahiya, professor from Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. I have now retired from TIFR, but I continue to have interest in how people perceive as astronomical events.
The cosmos has celestial bodies: the sun, the moon, the stars, the planets, which includes our most favorite planet, the Earth. And there is a unique phenomenon called the eclipse, which is our area of exploration in today's episode. An eclipse, solar, lunar, annular, hybrid, or whole, is a natural, unusual yet rare sight in the sky. It is a beautiful phenomenon happening right in front of our eyes. But do you have any idea how we know about these natural happenings, the eclipses? What records do we find for eclipses in the past? The records of eclipses are principally of two kinds: literary or texts on astronomy, and inscriptions on stones, walls, pillars, copper plates, etc. As far as literary or texts on astronomy is concerned, India has produced a vast literature on different aspects of astronomy. The earliest Vedic text exclusively devoted to astronomy is the Vedanga Jyotish of sage Lagadha. It is the earliest full-fledged literary work on Indian astronomy. Also, the four Vedic Samhitas, including the Rig Veda, the Yajurveda, the Samaveda, and the Atharva Veda, are known for their literature. Of course, the earliest among them is the Rig Veda. So, it is the most authentic and earliest source of information on eclipses.
Eclipses are a very scary event if you see it for the first time and if you are not initiated into what it is. Because suddenly your only source of energy and respite, the great Swarbhanu, the golden egg on the sky, suddenly disappears from the sky. And it scares you. And since we have been associating heavens with the gods, obviously sun and moon are the gods, and if the gods are going to be covered up or somehow disappear, then it has to be a demon that does that. So right from early periods, the first postulate about eclipses come by the belief that there is a great demon in the sky, there is a great Rakshasa in the sky who tries to eat up the sun for whatever reason. And in the ancient Indian literature, the demon who eats up the sun is called Swarbhanu. And so in Rigveda itself, you find a reference to Swarbhanu and his eating up of the sun. So in Rigveda itself, in the book 5, Shlok 40.1 to 40.5, we have this discussion of an eclipse.
The cause of eclipses is stated in detail in the Rig Veda. We refer to some shlokas that prove the fact. In Rigveda verse 5:45 to verse 9, Sir Atri has explained scientifically why an eclipse occurs.
यत्त्वा सूर्यस्वभानुस्तमसा विद्यत् आसुरः अक्षेत्रविद्यथा मुग्धो भुवनान्यदीधयुः.
O sun, when the demon Swarabhanu overspread you with darkness, all the world stood as if not knowing where they were.
स्वर्भानुरधयद्दिन्द्रमाया अवो दिवो वर्तमाना अवाहन् गूढहं सूर्यं तमसा पव्रतेन तुरीयेण ब्रह्मणा विन्दत् अत्रिः.
O Indra, you destroy the illusions of Swarabhanu, which exist under the sky. Sage Atri got back the sun, who was hidden by darkness, by means of the fourth Brahma incantation. The sage here has described how Swarabhanu created eclipses of the sun and the moon, and how the sun appeared after an eclipse in the sky. Swarabhanu is Swa, Bha and Anu. Swa means sky, Bha means light, Anu means follower. Follower of light is shadow, which is present in the sky, and an eclipse is seen due to this shadow.
ग्रावणो ब्रह्मा युयुजानः सपर्यन्कीरिणा देवान्नमसोपशिक्षन् अत्रिः सूर्यस्य दिवि चक्षुराधात् स्वर्भानुरपमाया अघुक्षत्.
The sage Atri set the pressed stone, propitiated the gods with prayers and salutations, and dispelled Swarbhanu and set his eyes on the sun's light. So Swarbhanu then accepts this responsibility from Indra, and after paying his respects to all the gods, goes ahead and dispels the illusion created by Swarbhanu and brings sun back to life.
यं वै सूर्यं स्वर्भानुस्तमसा विद्यदासुरः अत्रयस्तम् अन्वविन्दन् ह्यन्ये अशक्नुवन् हरिः ओम्.
Atri and his descendants alone could restore the sun when the demon had overspread the sun with darkness. None besides them had the power to do so. From the Rigvedic period, that is around 1200 BC, eclipses are believed to occur when a demon Swarabhanu tries to eat the sun or the moon. This story is neither considered logical by the scientific community nor by the people at large. On the contrary to the belief of Rahu-Ketu system, in one of the shlokas in the Brihad Samhita by Varaha Mihir and Rigved, it is clearly marked that an eclipse can by no means be ascertained through omens and other indications.
Later on, the story gets modified into the story of Rahu and Ketu, and we probably famously not know Swarbhanu, but we know Rahu and Ketu. And we all know the great story of Rahu and Ketu, who were two demons, and the Samudra Manthan that happens, and after Samudra Manthan, the Amrut that comes out, the demon tries to do it, Rahu tries to steal the Amrut, and his head is cut off by Surya. And so Rahu picks up an enmity with Surya and Chandra, and so you have Rahu and Ketu who create the eclipses. So in Purana's story, especially in Bharata Samhita, we have this discussion of Rahu and Ketu, who in some sense are the head and body of Swarbhanu, who was originally the cause of eclipses. And so Bruhat Samhita says,
एवमुपरागकारणमुक्तम् इदं दिव्यदृग्भिराचार्यैः राहुरकारणमस्मिन् इत्युक्तः शास्त्रसद्भावः.
In this manner, the ancient seers endowed with divine insight, have explained the cause of eclipses. Hence the scientific fact is that Rahu is not hence the scientific fact is that Rahu is not at all the cause of eclipses.
And so it goes on to say that in the manner the ancient seers endowed the divine insight have explained the causes of eclipses, and hence the scientific fact of eclipses of Rahu and Ketu are more profound than that. And in Bruhat Samhita, then there is another slok which says that that actually for the first time defines the causes of eclipses, and that's why it is very clear that it says that Rahu and Ketu are not the causes. It says
भूच्छायां स्वग्रहणे भास्करमर्कग्रहे प्रविशतीन्दुः प्रग्रहणमतः पश्चान्नेन्दुर्भानोश्च पूर्वार्धात्.
what the shlok says is that at a lunar eclipse, the moon enters the shadow of the earth, and at solar eclipse, it enters the sun's disk. So essentially, it comes between the sun and the earth, which actually is the modern explanation for eclipse. The shlok also goes on to say that this is the reason why lunar eclipse does not give in from the west, and the solar eclipse doesn't come from the eastern limb. So by the time of Bruhat Samhita, we are very clear about what is the cause of the eclipse and what is the scientific explanation of eclipse.
The celestial bodies have even been beautifully mentioned in Aryabhatiya, the works of the great Indian mathematician and astronomer Aryabhatta.
Aryabhatta and his later followers in the 5th century AD define for the first time the manner of calculating eclipses. Don't worry about anything else. Just look at 2 points, Rahu and Ketu, who have a period of 18.5 years around the earth. See exactly where the moon and the sun are with respect to those 2 points, and you know that in any particular cycle, that your 27-day cycle for the moon and of course 1 day cycle for the sun or 1 year cycle for the sun, depending on what you are calculating, you just see how far they are from Rahu. And because these are mathematically precise points, as they come close to each other, as the sun and the moon start approaching Rahu, you know that an eclipse is due, and you can actually calculate with great precision the exact date and time of that eclipse. And lunar eclipse, of course, is visible in the entire night sky. So they know whether the Rahu and Ketu and Rahu and sun moon meeting is going to happen when it is day or night. You can determine whether the solar eclipse or lunar eclipse. In some sense, they could have calculated even exact location as to where it would be visible and where it would be not, because solar eclipses are very sensitive to the exact relative location. So sometimes they did not get the exact locations right as to where it would be visible, but they certainly got their predictions of when the next eclipse would occur with a very high degree of precision by the time of 500 AD. There are of course corrections that have to be continuously made because of the precession of the earth and the precession of the orbits, etc. But those things were accounted for by careful observations of the sun and moon's rotation periods and so on. And so we had a pretty good method of calculating the eclipses and the location of eclipses from early point.
Aryabhatta even stated that the moon and planets shine by reflected sunlight. So, if you want to learn about the causes of specific eclipses, there is clear mention in Aryabhatiya and the Brihat Samhita by Varaha Mihir as well. With time, our perspectives change, but facts don't. There are many more references in the literary records. For example, if one wants to ascertain the time of a lunar eclipse, one must find the true longitudes of the sun, the moon, and its ascending node on the full moon day in the light half of the lunar month at sunset. Even the possibility of an eclipse and duration of eclipses are defined in shlokas. Moreover, for calculating the duration of the eclipse, there is a scientific formula to follow. Our expert Dr. Mayank Vahiya will help us in these ancient yet modern calculations.
Not only is Aryabhatta aware that this is a question of shadows and movement of shadows, he has one more interesting idea in his mind. He says that, look, the sun and the moon have to be at the same spot in order for the eclipse to happen. So instead of worrying about the same spot in the sky and issues like that, he now converts Rahu and Ketu into 2 dark planets. And these are the points from our modern scientific point of view is where the where the path of the sun and the path of the moon meet. And so sun moves in its own path, the moon moves in its own path, and there's about a 5-degree difference between the two. But these two paths intersect at 2 points. So what is done is that each of these 2 points are called Rahu and Ketu. Now sun and moon will pass to the Rahu and Ketu point regularly. But if both of them pass to the same point together is when you have an eclipse. So that is how we have our first calculations about how eclipses are calculated. And this is a brilliantly simple way of calculating, because you can keep track of Rahu and Ketu in the sky as if it were a planet, and therefore you can calculate its orbit and movement, and you don't have to worry about crossing of eclipses, etc. All you do is define 2 points, and you know that if the sun and the moon come together to the same point, you have an eclipse. It's simple as that. And so Rahu and Ketu are now were first Bhanu and then his body, and then it was clear that no, Rahu and Ketu do not exist. From there it is converted into an astronomical idea of 2 points in the sky, or 2 dark planets in the sky. And if the sun and moon are on the same side, then you have solar eclipse. If the sun and moon are on the opposite side, you have a lunar eclipse. And that is therefore that Rahu and Ketu eventually become a very important set of calculations. And in fact, in Navagraha worships, etc., you see these two, Rahu and Ketu, as 2 planets, as dark planets, which are not visible in the sky, but which are very important to all astronomers who are calculating eclipses, especially the time duration of eclipses and so on. So for them, it is very important.
All these calculations for celestial bodies, their movements and functions were done scientifically even in times immemorial. In recent years, Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Mumbai did extensive research on the eclipses in ancient India. Dr. Mayank Vahiya and B.V. Subbarayappa refer to a book, Panchavimsa Brahmana, dated to between 900 and 600 BC. It says that in an eclipse, the sun originally becomes black, then silvery, and eventually red before returning to its original glory. One can identify these colors with modern descriptions of eclipses starting from totality. Apart from these Vedic and scientific references, there are a number of inscriptions that refer to eclipses in ancient times.
The scare of eclipse doesn't go away just because you know why it is happening. The fear that the sun will be covered by something is to all of us very scary. And even to those who are not scary, they can look around at the time of an eclipse. The animals still have instinctive fear of what happens to the eclipse. People have created great methods in which to help the sun and the moon get rid of this Rahu as quickly as possible. And the best way of helping the gods, of course, is to donate money to have a great Agni who can then deliver material quickly to the sun to get rid of Rahu and Ketu. So donation to a Brahmin who will in turn deliver the goods of gods is a very early concept of avoiding eclipses. In some other cultures, they actually shine diamonds and jewelry. They reflect the light from candles. They light up candles and they try to substitute the sun and try to give it various brightnesses. But in India, the method is that we collect donations, give it as a havan to Agni, who will convey these resources to the sun to help him avoid the eclipses. So eclipses are times of great donations. Small people make small donations, great people make great donations. And in many of these great donations, there are people who have made temples, there are people who have made ponds, there are people who have made all kinds of contributions to save themselves from the bad effect of eclipses. In fact, it's interesting that in some tribals in India, eclipses are looked at very differently. So they know totality is something that is good for everybody. If the eclipse covers the lower part of the sun, it is bad for humans. If it covers the upper part of the sun, it is bad for animals and so on. Then there are other tribes in India which actually put a stump in the ground and wait for it to fall. And as the eclipse is over and the sun is bright again and dries up the land, this stalk that they have put in the ground falls one way or the other, and they are very particular about what that means to their as an omen to their future life. So eclipses are something that everybody is scared of and everybody makes donations. And great donations are also marked. So you get this copper plates, you get stone inscriptions, you get markings of eclipses, and you get recordings of eclipses all over India, saying that this temple was built by donation or by so and so because there was an eclipse happening. And that tradition has been very old. So from about 300-400 AD onwards, you actually get a fairly continuous observation of eclipses in all great kingdoms, and especially in kingdoms in south have been particularly sensitive to recording these eclipses.
The inscriptions on stone slabs, walls, pillars and copper plates have been indeed impressive sources as records of eclipses. These eclipses occurred from the 5th century CE to the middle of the 19th century. The earliest inscriptions belong to the 3rd century BCE, but no record of eclipses has been found in them, nor in those up to the 4th century CE. It is only from the 5th century CE onwards till the middle of the 19th century that an appreciable number of inscriptions have recorded eclipses with dates.
If you look at all this information, unfortunately, Government of India has this great corpus indicanum, where every copper plate or every bit of stone recording or whatever information they find, they publish it. So if you look at these corpuses that were brought out by various kings and all the various regions, you can get an idea of eclipses, and we get an eclipse of about thousands of eclipses. Rigvedic eclipse cannot be dated, must be somewhere around 1000 or 1200 BC. But from 440 BC onwards, we get eclipse records, and they become systematic by about 300-400 AD, all the way till about 900 or 1000 AD. And then because of the fact that the cultures tend to sort of spread out, we don't have too many records until 17th, 18th century. So you get a very good idea of eclipses from the various temple recordings, from various stone recordings, from various copper plates, etc., etc. And they make a very rich source of information.
The Archaeological Survey of India has collected various such inscriptions for more than 100 years, and these records are available. Tata Institute of Fundamental Research have scanned these records and noted down the references to eclipses, including the date and type of eclipse, the location where the writing is found, and the nature. Tata Institute of Fundamental Research scientists even found records of dated 469 lunar eclipses and 470 solar eclipses. In this, there are multiple records of the same eclipse. However, many eclipses are recorded at more than one place. Hence, they have records of 340 distinct lunar and 286 distinct solar eclipses. They cover a period from 400 CE to 1800 CE. All this and much more. For example, the direction of the eclipse, eclipsed and non-eclipsed portions, measurements like length and diameter of the sun, moon, earth, shadow, the longitudes and latitudes of the sun and the moon, distance of the planet from the earth, distance of the sun and the moon from the earth, times of first and last contacts of the celestial bodies during the eclipse, and above all, computations for all these mathematical equations are discussed in different verses of the Vedas, Puranas, and other literary works. Dr. Mayank Vahiya, with his concluding words.
So, for example, the Earth's spin has not been constant. We know that there are tides, and we know the sun moves around, and that tide causes friction between the Earth and the moon, and the Earth tends to slow down, or depending on how the other angular momentum goes, it can even spin up. So how fast was the Earth moving at any time is a very important question in astronomy, and you cannot understand that question by any other means except by eclipses. Because solar eclipses are very sensitive to space and location, and therefore that local time at that epoch, eclipses are the only clocks we have about how the Earth was spinning thousands of years ago, at least hundreds of years ago, when the eclipse records exist. And so they have been very important to us. And it turns out that the Earth is spinning up today, and it was spinning down at some stage, and all these kind of things are recorded in this day eclipse data, and therefore scientists are very keen on getting this eclipse data because that is our only clock to knowing how fast the earth was spinning or how fast the earth was moving around the sun over the last hundreds of years, and therefore you can determine much more detail. So for example, we know that the length of a day during the time of dinosaurs must have been as little as 23 hours because of the rate at which we can measure how the earth is spinning down because of tidal forces and other things. But eclipses therefore are not only a unique record in evolution of human thought, from Svarbhanu to Rahu and Ketu to negation of Rahu and Ketu and eventually creating Rahu and Ketu into two dark points in the sky. It is useful for records to see how donations and how keen a given culture was in terms of recording eclipses, and of course in modern times trying to understand how the sun, earth and moon dynamics change over a period of hundreds of years. So eclipses are scary, eclipses are breathtaking, but eclipses are also a very good tool of understanding these dynamics between the earth, sun and moon, and therefore they are very precious data. And India has a very long history of recording these eclipses, which comes very useful in this 22nd century scientists who want to know how the earth's movement changed. And therein lies the importance of eclipse for a scientist. For us, of course, observing eclipse itself is great fun. We know that the moon's surface is not sharp. So as the sun comes out of the shadow, you can see these waves coming out and you can see beautiful observational effects. But I just want to end by saying that there are a lot of fears. These fears have given to irrational beliefs, saying that when the sun is covered by the moon, sun sends out some extra ultraviolet radiation or the radiation that is dangerous for us, or you should not eat, or you should throw away water, etc., etc. Those are false beliefs. The sun does not even bother to find out where the moon shadow is. Forever the moon shadow exists, forever the earth shadow exists. During eclipses, they just happen to touch each other. So there is no change in astronomy, there is no change in sun, there is no change in the behavior of the sun, and therefore we should not give in to these false fears of eclipses. From 500 AD, for 1500 AD, we Indians have known that eclipses are nothing but play of shadows and nothing to be scared of. And we should follow that tradition and not be carried away by all these false fears of eclipses we have.
Worth special mention at this juncture is the immense, invaluable contribution of Vatasheri Parameshwara Nambudiri, circa 1380 to 1460, a major Indian mathematician and astronomer of the Kerala School of Astronomy and Mathematics, founded by Madhava of Sangamagrama. Parameshwara was a proponent of observational astronomy in medieval India, and he himself had made a series of observations on eclipses to verify the accuracy of the computational methods then in use. Based on his eclipse observations, Parameshwara proposed several corrections to the astronomical parameters which had been in use since the times of Aryabhatta. The computational scheme based on the revised set of parameters has come to be known as the Driganita or Drig system. Parameshwara was also a prolific writer on matters relating to astronomy. At least 25 manuscripts have been identified as being authored by Parameshwara. Parameshwara wrote commentaries on many mathematical and astronomical works, such as those by Bhaskara I and Aryabhatta. He made a series of observations on eclipses over a 55-year period. He constantly attempted to compare these with the theoretically computed positions of the planets and revised planetary parameters based on his observations. One of Parameshwara's more significant contributions was his mean value type formula for the inverse interpolation of the sign. He was the first mathematician to give a formula for the radius of the circle circumscribing a cyclic quadrilateral. The expression is sometimes attributed to Liu-Lier, 1782, that is, 350 years later. Eclipses, as we all know, will keep on taking place in future as well. What will always be of interest to researchers and students are the logical, intricate calculations of multiple aspects of the phenomena done with immaculate precision in our ancient texts, which will always act as a true guiding force for generations to come.
Ancient Indian knowledge of eclipses. You heard the 20th episode of our all-new series on traditional Indian knowledge systems, Power of Listening. This program was scripted by Neha Tripathi, science communicator and writer, and the expert on the show was Dr. Mayank Vahiya, scientist, Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. We hope you enjoyed the program. This series has been conceptualized by Shashi Shekhar Vempati, CEO Prasar Bharati, and produced by Vinod Kumar. Special thanks to AIR Mumbai, Amol, Parth, and Randheer Thakur for their contributions. This episode is available on our official YouTube channel, Akashvani AIR. Be there on the 18th of February, same time, same frequencies. Bye for now.